Today's bite-sized episode is sponsored by AG1, one of the most nutrient-dense whole food supplements that I've come across, and I myself have been drinking it regularly for over 5 years. It contains vitamins, minerals, probiotics, prebiotics, digestive enzymes, and so much more, and can help with energy, focus, gut health, digestion, and support a healthy immune system. If you go to drinkag1.com/live more, they are giving my listeners a very special offer, a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first order. See all details at drinkag1.com/live more. Welcome to Feel Better, Live More Bite Size, your weekly dose of positivity and optimism to get you ready for the weekend. Today's clip is from episode 414 of the podcast with Dr. Chris Van Taleken. Chris is a practicing infectious diseases doctor, one of the UK's leading science broadcasters, and author of the book, Ultra-Processed People. Overconsumption of ultra-processed foods may be the biggest public health crisis of our time. And in this clip, he shares why he believes we eat so much stuff that isn't really food and why we can't stop. I think when a lot of people think about their diet and the foods that they're consuming, they think about it through the lens of weight. One of the really interesting things that you elaborate on in your book is this idea that ultra-processed food consumption is harmful to us or has the potential to be harmful to us irrespective of its impact on our weight.
We have really good data that they drive a huge number of what we kind of euphemistically call negative health outcomes, which is everything from cardiovascular disease to metabolic disease to early death. So we're pretty sure that ultra-processed food is now the leading cause of early death on planet Earth, ahead of tobacco. So if you, like most people in Britain, eat an average of 60% of your calories from ultra-processed food, you're still vulnerable to all those harms. So if we break down the evidence, because we're sure that ultra-processed food, that a non-whole food diet is causing these problems. And if you go, well, what are the plausible mechanisms? You're like, well, synthetic emulsifiers, we've got really good data now that they scrub out your gut, they thin the mucus lining, they disrupt the microbiome. Now, do we understand all the knock-on impacts of that? No. But do we know that it generates terrible inflammation and metabolic disease in rats? Yes. You know, are rats people? No. But if it does it to rats, do we have reason to be concerned about the number of synthetic emulsifiers we're eating? Yeah, absolutely. Do we have early human data that's troubling? Absolutely. And could this also explain, if we scrub out the gut, we inflame it, and we start leaking fecal bacteria into our bloodstream that drains to our liver, do we think this cycle of inflammation that's going to drive might be explaining the increases in GI cancers, in gastrointestinal cancers, including liver cancer in young people? Yeah, it could be. It's pretty plausible.
Yeah.
And the emulsifiers, and then we can go through that with carboxymethylcellulose, with maltodextrin, with non-nutritive sweeteners. So with the additives alone, we can start doing that. Then we could look at all the synthetic fats and on and on and on. So the idea that this food might be driving all these problems isn't exactly wildly improbable. It's extremely likely and well evidenced.
And where I feel comfortable as a doctor making these recommendations is if we think about what's the risk of harm here? Well, there's pretty much zero risk of harm when you improve your diet.
The only diet we've ever studied that's associated with disease is an ultra-processed Western industrial diet. So there are all kinds of, we're going to come to the definition, but there's this very long 11-paragraph formal definition on the United Nations Food and Agriculture website. But we can sum it up by going, it's like food made by companies to generate growth for pension funds. That's a good working definition. High fat, salt, sugar is sort of it sweep. If you use the definition as we do in law in the UK, it sweeps up about 85% of the problem products. We could say anything with a health claim, almost all of those low fat, prebiotic, supports your immune system, has 30% less sugar, all of that is ultra processed, or most of it. So how we define the harmful food, we're talking about American food. We're talking about if your food is made in a big factory owned by a transnational food corporation, there is a good chance that it will cause you harm. So there is a huge difference between processing, which is ancient, and we have to process our food, and ultra-processing, which is new. It's exclusively industrial, and it is about making products that are convenient, easily marketed, addictive, and very, very profitable.
Let's talk about these ultra-processed. Let's get some examples. I did something this morning, which I haven't done in a long, long time, right? I went to our local corner shop, which I do go there to get certain things, but I came back with a bag full of shopping of things that I haven't bought in a long, long time. Now, I'm going to get them on the table, Chris, and through the lens of what you've been writing about and talking about so far, I want you to help us all understand, how do we figure out whether that food's product that we're buying is helping us or harming us?
Okay.
Ingredient labels are things that I've spoken about on this show for many years, and you've got to read ingredient labels because otherwise you simply don't know what you're getting.
Never read an ingredient list until maybe 2019 or something.
You're kidding me.
I just assumed it was probably all fine. I was a molecular biologist. I'm like, well, chemicals are normal. It's fine to have chemicals in food. I just hadn't read it. And now I assume everyone does read ingredients labels. And when I show, you've worked in hospitals. We all eat it the same. We all eat it Pret or Greggs or Boots, or we buy our sandwiches from M&S. When you get people to read the ingredients on a sandwich from these places, and it's got 38 different ingredients, people are like, wow, I just never looked.
Let's just talk about how, in inverted commas, real foods become ultra-processed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I've got it here.
Have you got some bread?
Again, I just looked in the local newsagents. I just thought, what is looking healthy?
Yeah.
Right? Medium slice, whole meal, no added sugar. Right? So perhaps talk me through what's in that.
Let's have a quick look at the ingredients and check it is. So it's got vegetable oils, including sustainable palm. There's no such thing as sustainable palm. Let's be clear about this. And palm fat that's in this is not the red spicy liquid that you squeeze out of palm nuts for West African cooking. This is refined, bleached, deodorized, hydrogenated, and interesterified palm fat. So that makes it. Then there's wheat gluten, and then there's emulsifiers E471, E481, E472E. So that is diacetyl tartaric acid esters of mono and diglycerides of fatty acids. So this is ultra processed bread. It means all my other foods with lots of ingredients. Yes, tick. Foods with health claims, no added sugar. Real bread, so I would say it may be useful for many people to not think of this or any bread like this as real bread. Real bread has 3 ingredients. It has water, wheat, and salt. That's how you make bread. And you can use naturally occurring yeasts. This has, no added sugar. Sugar should not be in any bread. I mean, sugar's what you put in cake. It doesn't go in bread. And
do you know, can I just say, Chris, one of the ways that you outline in your book I thought was brilliant, which was, if you're wondering whether that food is ultra processed, it probably is.
If you're reading an ingredients list, you're probably eating an industrially produced food. If you go and buy broccoli, there is no ingredients list on it. There's also no health claim on broccoli or cabbage or tomatoes or onions or
I call
garlic.
them one ingredient foods.
It's like one ingredient food. The one thing we're sure is that if you cook at home, unless you are cooking those kind of internet cakes where you make them all out of candy, if you're cooking at home, almost no matter what ingredients you're using, you're going to be doing yourself a service. So that bread, the difference between that bread and what I would call real bread is there are several things about that are harmful. It's incredibly soft. So that is one of the products that you will spread with an ultra-processed spread of some kind, some margarine, maybe some low-fat mayonnaise or some chocolate spread, and you will consume calories at a rate your body cannot keep up with. The flour is very, very fine particles, and the protein has been back added to the flour. Bread flour should be very high protein. They've back added the wheat gluten into that for absolute control. And then it's emulsified, and the emulsifiers do all kinds of things. Broadly, that bread is a kind of whipped foam of these commodity carbs, proteins and fats. And then it's sort of baked into this very light, soft, spongy substance that is a vehicle for ultra-processed spreads. So the main thing about the difference between that and real bread is that you'll consume it very quickly. But it has got those emulsifiers, which we have some evidence will drive some harms.
This is ultra-processed.
This is ultra-processed.
Right. Why is that a problem?
So in terms of the ways, so for a start, we can't necessarily demonize just this product, or at least not quite yet in this podcast. But for the moment, what I say in general is there's no one thing that's poisonous. It's that eating an ultra-processed dietary pattern is harmful. So it's when the whole pattern of your diet, when 60% of your calories come on average from products like this, ultra-processed products, that's what we are sure is harmful. One of the things that the everyone at the food company says is the way that they're all developed is they're tested on very big groups of people, and they do A/B testing. So, you get Cocoa Pops A, Cocoa Pops B, and the main thing you measure is how much do people eat, and how quick do they eat it? Because we know that speed of consumption is very important for increasing intake. And so every year you try a slightly new ratio of sugar and salt, a little bit more cocoa mass, slightly different flavorings, crispier rice, softer rice. You do all these different adjustments and the food becomes more and more palatable. So with any ultra-processed product, you can say the emulsifiers harm you, the non-nutritive sweeteners harm you. It's the softness, it's the sugar-fat ratio. It's every single aspect.
It's the combo. Saying bread is good or bread is bad is problematic. Good or bad is problematic anyway around food, but whether it's a health-promoting food or a food that isn't promoting health, it kind of depends how the bread is made. I think the key point for us to remember, like you've already emphasized, it's about a pattern.
Yeah.
If you're having, I don't know, let's say a bowl of Cocoa Pops, let's say you're really fit, you love exercising, you eat well, but after one of your gym sessions each week, your treat to yourself is a bowl of Cocoa Pops. Well, you know what? In the whole scheme of things, it's probably not going to be a problem.
Yeah, people go out and they have a cigarette and a glass of wine, and it's some people have difficult relationships with certain products and they may find abstinence easy. So for me, I have a real problem with ultra-processed food. I've been very addicted to it, so I am abstinent. But that's quite an extreme position. And that's the position that someone who lives with a difficult relationship with alcohol or tobacco would live in. Addicts can't be moderate. But I think most people don't become addicted and they can just cut down if they can afford to. So inside all of us, there's an idea that with an abundance of calories around, humans have just sort of evolved to eat loads of calories, and if there's too much food, we'll eat it and we'll all gain weight. And that isn't true. We've had abundant calories for, centuries, for a really long time. Many populations have, without any weight gain. Mm-hmm. And so inside us, we have this satiety mechanism. There's a long-term one that regulates the amount of fat on our bodies. And there's a short-term one that midway through the pizza eating contest goes, mate, you have to stop. You've eaten too much. Now that short-term satiety mechanism is a set of, it's very complex, and we don't understand it fully, but it's a set of hormones and nerve signals from the gut. And in simple terms, ultra-processed food is sort of pre-digested, if you like. It is so broken down, the particles are so fine that partly you can consume it without really chewing, so you don't get the hormonal release that you get from the chewing, and partly it seems to be absorbed in a part of your gut that doesn't release a fullness signal. It never gets to the bit of your small bowel where the hormones come from that say, it's time to stop eating now. And so this is one of the reasons we think why so many people listening can have this experience of you're sort of continuing to eat food and you should be full and you kind of are almost full and yet you can't seem to stop eating. It's that disconnect between, your evolutionary expectation of when you should feel full and when you actually do. So this is how the food is designed. It's not surprising when one of the things you're measuring in these design trials is how quickly do people eat it and how much do they eat.
You famously did this 30-day trial where you would mostly eat ultra-processed food.
80% of my calories came from ultra-processed food for 30 days.
This 30-day trial you did, at the end of it, you said your weight went up by 6 kilos. Your levels of leptin, the satiety hormone, went up 5 times. Your levels of CRP, the marker of inflammation, doubled. Those were quite remarkable findings in just 30 days. Those are the kind of objective measurements that you could do pre and post. But it was also interesting to hear those more subjective things, how you felt, what happened when you woke up at night, how did your brain function. You're also very open in the book about what it did to your bowels and how quickly that returned or it returned back to normal when you returned back to a whole food diet? So maybe
that was really cool. Was the lesson, the intellectual lesson, was underlined by kind of overdosing on the problem, and then suddenly going cold turkey because I didn't want it anymore, and it was like the clouds parted. So, as a physician, I think we live often very different lives to our patients. We're generally more privileged in pure finance, but we also generally make more money because doctors are paid. And so we eat different food. We have different levels of education about food. And so what happened in the space of that month was I kind of aged 10 years and I developed all these problems that I hadn't had before. The sleeplessness where you wake up in the middle of the night and you go to the fridge, that was kind of new. And the piles and the general aching and misery, all of which at the time it was weird. I didn't associate it with the food until I quit the food and it all went away. You've talked about this, I think you understand this better than me. When we feel anxious or unhappy, we generally point at the thing in front of us and go, that's the problem. It's my work, it's my children, it's my marriage. And it was when I stopped the food, I went, oh, my wife didn't suddenly become an absolute pain in the neck for a month. In fact, the opposite was true. It was me that had become unbearable, and it was driven by the food. So I was very inflamed. And the sleeplessness was, you get into, it's that vicious cycle. I mean, it was your pillars. It was like I destroyed those pillars one by one, starting with the food, and that interrupted everything else.
I mean, Chris, hearing that is really powerful because I almost do the opposite with my patients. So you went onto a specific diet, which then gave you a whole host of non-specific and specific symptoms, right? General malaise, moodiness, low energy, low vitality.
Stopped exercising,
work was hard, all these kind of things. But you also had, constipation, anal fissure, all these things that you write about. And I'm going to draw this into another part that you think that we shouldn't be looking to the industry for the solution. The solution has to come from government and doctors. I want to talk about that in just a moment. I, like many doctors, when they finished medical school, thought that they had been taught all the tools that they need to get their patients well. And then I started practicing. And I thought, well, what I've learned is fantastic for maybe 20% of my patients, but there's a whole 80% of people with chronic symptoms, sometimes vague, non-specific symptoms that I can't quite put a label on, that I don't really have many tools to help. And listeners to my show will know I went on a journey from 2010 or so. I've been going around the world, going to conferences to try and learn about nutrition and movement and sleep and stress and the gut microbiome and how did these things affect us. And I would say around 2013, I made quite a significant change in the way I practice, which is with a lot of patients who came in who had chronic symptoms, whether it was sometimes autoimmune conditions, sometimes fatigue, energy, irritable bowel syndrome, even vague things I didn't know what it was. I would try and suggest to them that they go on a whole food diet for 2 to 3 weeks if they could. And I remember on a scrap bit of paper from the printer, I'd write down, I said, look, if you can, what I'd recommend for the next few weeks is just see what happens if you're only consuming whole foods. Now, I recognize it can be hard. I recognize there's a poverty issue. I recognize all of that. But I started to get truly mesmerized when people would come back a few weeks later, go, oh, my mood's better.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have that anymore. Oh, that sort of vague arm pain, that I don't have that anymore. I've got more energy. I'm sleeping better. I'm not talking about weight.
Blood sugar measurements.
I'm not talking about weight. My hypertension, my high blood pressure's gone. And I thought, wait a minute. How many of the problems that we're seeing that we're taught to diagnose, give a label to, and then give a treatment to, how many of these are downstream consequences of the way that we're eating? I still don't think across medicine, across the population, we understand that the food we're eating, and I get it's hard, right? I'm not saying this is easy. It can impact all kinds of different things, right? It's not just your weight. It's so much more.
Yeah.
Because when you do that with patients, it's just like your experience of 30 days of doing it. And then within 48 hours, your sleep, your bowels, everything starts to return back. I think that's a very powerful experience for a patient to go, wait a minute. I had no idea that this was impacting me that much.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed that bite-sized clip. Do spread the love by sharing this episode with your friends and family. And if you want more, why not go back and listen to the original full conversation with my guest? If you enjoyed this episode, I think you will really enjoy my bite-sized Friday email. It's called the Friday 5, and each week I share things that I do not share on social media. It contains 5 short doses of positivity, articles or books that I'm reading, quotes that I'm thinking about, exciting research I've come across, and so much more. I really think you're going to love it. The goal is for it to be a small yet powerful dose of feel good to get you ready for the weekend. You can sign up for it free of charge at drchatterjee.com/Friday5. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Make sure you have pressed subscribe, and I'll be back next week with my long-form conversation on Wednesday and the latest episode of Bite Size next Friday.